O'Galley Electric bringing you hour 3 of a Tuesday morning, this 12th day of May, 2026. Dave Bowman is with us, and our headline at BillMick.com, teaching the educators and the government, and we're going to turn to teaching the rest of us, because in this hour of a Tuesday morning, it's always Dave Does History, and we've got links to Dave Bowman and his work there on the show page at BillMick.com, again, teaching the educators and the government. Dave, we are getting to the end of the Declaration of Independence as we march ever closer to our Liberty 250 conclusion on the 4th of July. Where are we going today, sir?
So let me start with an apology. When I put this list together for Bill, I actually got it out of order. This is actually next week's show, and next week's show will be this week's show. So if you're listening on podcast, skip ahead to next week and then come back to this one. But for the rest of you, just pretend.
Okay.
Popular Mechanics says we're going to be able to do time travel, but only backwards. So you get the idea. Every breakup has that moment. We've all been there, especially us dudes. Somebody sits down, they take a deep breath, they look at you across the table. Sometimes what they say is honest, sometimes it's just theatrics. But
it always starts with we need to talk.
Right. Yeah. But it's always followed with that speech that sounds rehearsed. And it always goes like this: it's not you, it's me. Humanity has been delivering variations of that line for literally thousands of years, usually while avoiding direct eye contact and hoping nobody makes a scene. But here's the thing. Nobody who's ever said that actually means it. What they actually mean is, it's not me, it's you. And now we've reached the point in the Declaration of Independence where Jefferson and the Continental Congress look England directly in the eye across the table and say, well, sorry, it's not working. It's not us. It's you.
And we pick it up in just 60 seconds right here on WMMB. It's Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live. And Dave, we've spent the rest of this document laying out the grievances that we've had. Here are the problems. And staying with your analogy, it's like we've talked and talked about this and nothing has changed, so now it's time to walk away.
It's almost like that, isn't it?
It is.
Paragraph after paragraph that are all accusations against King George III. And they all start with this rhythm. He has, and he has refused, or he has dissolved. And all of a sudden, the tone kind of shifts in the document. The colonies stop addressing this to the king, and they start speaking directly to the people of England, Great Britain themselves. The language kind of softens a little bit. The pronouns actually change. And the revolutionaries who had spent most of the document building this legal case against royal tyranny suddenly almost sound regretful as they refer to the English people as our British brethren. Now, that's a phrase that matters more than most people realize today, if they even make it that far in the document. We often remember the Declaration of Independence as this fiery, rebellious document. But this passage actually presents the colonies not as reckless revolutionaries eager for separations, but a people who have exhausted every possible attempt at reconciliation first. The text kind of shifts from he has to we have. We warned you. We appealed to your justice, your big noble hearts. We reminded you of our shared blood, this great word consanguinity that I can't say, consanguinity, which is a fancy word which means our family tree. We remind them of that. That's a word that sounds a lot less than political philosophy and more like a disease, but it's really important that we're trying to use that language that says to them, look, we're one people. But it just doesn't get received that way. We're not speaking to strangers here. We're speaking to literally cousins. Look, I'm fascinated by my own family history, as you know. It's bizarre to me how many cousins that I have going back in this time frame that are still in England. They're trading partners. Some of them used to be our neighbors. Some of them are still family members. We are all fellow subjects, connected by a common language, or divided by a common language, as Winston Churchill once put it. We have the same religion, the same history. This is not just an anti-colonial uprising against a distant empire. It's a civil war inside the English-speaking world itself. The Declaration acknowledges that painfully, and the colonies insist that we had repeatedly appealed to the native justice of the British people, hoping that even ordinary English citizens would recognize the dangers posed by Parliament and the Crown. Look, if they'll do it to us, they'll do it to you.
You think there was a hint of maybe they'll decide they're going to overthrow the king at this point? Do you think that was ever in their minds?
I don't know that it was ever in the minds of the British people, but it's certainly in the minds of the king, and it's certainly in the minds of Parliament, some in Parliament. There are a lot of people in Parliament who are saying, you know what, they're right, you should just let them go. We'll be better off if you do. But the king, as we've talked about, King George and his ego. Instead, the British people remain deaf to the voice of justice. And therefore, we don't really want to separate from you. It's not working out. It's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jefferson's original draft had been far harsher towards the British people themselves. Congress, although when we say Congress, what we really mean is John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, deliberately softened the language because many of the delegates still hoped to avoid permanently alienating Britain and the sympathetic voices in Britain as well. The revolution depends heavily upon international legitimacy, something we don't think about today. We're not writing this document for Americans. I know that sounds like a strange thing to say. The Declaration of Independence is not written for us. It's written for everybody else. We're explaining to everybody, the French, the Spanish, the Dutch, the Prussians, the Russians, anybody you can name, we're explaining to them why we had to do this. And it's easy to put our fingers on it and go, well, this is ours. But it's really about so much more than that. And that's why this remarkably polished rhetoric that Jefferson uses is so important. He uses alliteration, British brethren, connections and correspondence. These are phrases that are designed to linger in our ears. And then comes that memorable closing line. We hold you enemies in war, in peace, friends. This is classic. It's balanced. It's symmetrical. It's the sort of a phrase that sounds almost inevitable once you hear it. And more importantly, it reveals the larger purpose behind the passage. The colonies are drawing a firm political boundary while leaving open the possibility of future friendship. Boy, does that sound familiar? It's not you, it's me, but I still hope we can be friends.
Yeah. Well, I want to back you up for just a second. What was the buy-in factor in other nations? As you said, this was written for everybody else. What kind of buy-in did we see? I mean, eventually we had allies in the war, so some bought in, most certainly.
Spain and France became our allies. Nobody else joined Britain fighting against us. Well, except for some native tribes. But as a general rule, and we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that question as we get towards the end of this, okay?
Okay, very good.
This break is presented not as eternal hatred, but as a painful necessity for right now. And when you consider that it's not written solely for Americans, that it's written for a candid world, that Congress understands that France, Spain, the Dutch Republic, countless observers across Europe are watching this very closely. The colonies needed to prove that they had not rushed blindly towards rebellion. We're asking France and Spain, which are monarchies, to join us. Are we...
Think about that tough angle.
Yeah. There's an element here that's strange. We needed to demonstrate that we have petitioned, that we have warned, that we have negotiated, and that we've exhausted peaceful remedies before we finally said, okay, that's it, we're done, we're out of here. The denunciation of the British people, therefore, serves a larger philosophical purpose. It transforms the conflict from a domestic dispute into a moral argument about sovereignty. It rests squarely upon natural rights that claim that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now imagine saying that to an Englishman in 1776 in London. Hey, your government should derive its just powers from your consent. Well, wait, we don't have that here. They exist to secure life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are ideas that are very familiar to us, so we almost use them as civic wallpaper. We recite them mechanically, and we forget about them 5 minutes later. But it's here that this idea that we possess natural rights to leave political societies entirely, that sometimes we miss. And in our view, we had already become independent. There's some ambiguity here that we've talked about, but the British reaction to this, well, they don't buy it.
We'll see what happens next as we continue with Dave Does History. Nice to have you with us on a Tuesday morning here on WMMB.
From muskets to microphones, the story carries on. Just make sure that thing's not loaded, okay? Dave Does History, right here on Bill Mick Live.
And we continue on this Tuesday morning. Nice to have you along with us as the breakup with Great Britain sounds like breakups throughout history. Dave, where are we at now?
Well, let's step back for just a moment and go back to this idea that the Declaration of Independence is really written not for Americans. I mean, by the time Jefferson puts his pen to this paper, we've already made the decision. The colonials have already gone through this entire, we've been at war with Britain since April of last year. We've had common sense. We've had Adams and his treatise, his thoughts on government. We've had all these debates and arguments. The debate is done. It's over. We've had the May 10th and May 15th resolves, which have effectively declared independence. We've told our colonies, you're now states, form your own governments. The idea here is much different than I think an approach today would be. And again, I go back to why do most revolutions fail? Because they haven't thought through these things. And one of the things that we've done here, we're doing with the Declaration, is we are explaining to people why we feel the need to. The idea here is that Jefferson is making it clear that we need that legitimacy. And it's not just legitimacy that we want. It's legitimacy that we feel that the rest of the world deserves. We have a decent respect to the opinions of mankind, which requires us to do this. This is something we don't get in today's arguments. We don't even think about what other people need or why we should do this. It goes back, Bill, to the argument about why do you wear a coat and a tie? Because you're showing respect to other people when you do that. This decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires us to spell this out. We're trying to reach France, which is a monarchy. We're trying to reach Spain, which is a monarchy. By the way, Spain is a Catholic monarchy, as is France. We are pretty much, not Catholic. So we're trying to convince these people to be on our side. Not only are they monarchies, but religiously they're problematic for us. The Dutch Republic, which we are kind of looking at as a model. Other European powers, Russia, these are things we never talk about. Does anybody ever think about what's happening on the west coast of North America during this time frame? You ever wonder that? Who's over there? Anybody know?
That's a great question.
Russia. Russia has basically occupied everything from Alaska down to Northern California. Spain, of course, obviously has the rest.
Backyard.
Yeah, exactly. So all of these people are watching all this stuff, and it's important then that we define all these things, because if we don't, what really are we? We're just more rabble-rousers, and we don't want to necessarily do that. We've got to justify breaking these political bonds. We rely on the philosophical premise that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the government. These are dangerous thoughts in the world of 1776, folks. We are saying to these other monarchies that our reason is that because we're not giving our consent to being governed. If other people start reading this, your average person in, say, Madrid or Paris or Moscow starts reading this and starts agreeing with it, even if we get these countries on our side, we're infusing them with some very dangerous ideas here that they may not necessarily want their people to read. All of this is adding up, and all of this is feeding into this idea. Here's our reasons. Take it or leave it. But we are done because it ain't us, it's you.
So we're getting some buy-in from other nations, Dave, and this document crafted to lay out the grievances and say, okay, it's not us, it is you, and here's what's next.
It's an interesting idea, and we'll get there eventually, because these other countries, particularly France and Spain, do join in. It's not quite as clean as they want it to be, and they certainly don't want their people hearing about it. So
yeah, that's got to be a little conundrum.
When we get done with all this, though, this declaration justifying our independence, it looks really good. It seems to present an American mind that is united and certainly pointed. The problem is, of course, the texts, much like the Constitution. We used to have this argument back in 2010. Oh, we need to get back to the values of the framers. People would say to me all the time, and I would say, which framer in specific did you have in mind? Because if you think 55 men went to Philadelphia and agreed on everything that they put in the Constitution, I want to drink whatever it is you're drinking, because it wasn't even close. At the end, only 39 of them signed it, and even those 39 disagreed. Same thing here. We got 56 guys in this room who are arguing about independence, whether we should declare independence or not. Some of them are absolutely on board. Jefferson, Adams, Madison. Some of them aren't so sure. Dickinson and others are still kind of, what are we really doing this here? This document looks like smooth water, but underneath, it's like a duck's legs. They're really just, rolling through this stuff because there's no truly coherent, united vision here. Jefferson leans towards his understanding of political society, believing that humans both possess what he calls a natural right to quit society. In effect, Jefferson believes that the minute the colonists left Britain and settled in America, they were independent. That's his reading of the whole thing. Others see it differently. They consider themselves to be heirs to the British constitutional traditions, and they're loyal subjects whose liberties have been violated because Parliament could not adequately represent them. Taxation without representation. They didn't necessarily reject monarchy itself or inherited British constitutional traditions, but they believed that the system had failed structurally and that representation across such distance was impossible, and therefore independence was justified on that basis.
Got just a minute left here, Dave, but in that regard, had they granted colonial presence in Parliament, would that have changed this and stopped it from happening?
Yes, it would have. There's another deeper question, which is, and we asked this all the way back at the beginning, what if King George had said, the future is in America, I'm going to move the capital, the crown, from London to Boston? What if he had done that?
Yeah, that's true.
Especially Farmer George. He would have fit in quite well. There were opportunities and off-ramps. They weren't taken. And at the end of the day, the Declaration of Independence says, it's not us, it's you.
We take it to the final steps and how we're looking at that And we take your calls at 321-768-1240 when Dave Does History continues right here on Bill Mick Live. Stay with us.
The ink may be dry, but the arguments are still alive. Dave Does History continues now on Bill Mick Live.
O'Galley Electric, the hour sponsor, Dave Bowman, the professor in residency here, as we look at Liberty 250 and a change in tone for the Declaration of Independence, saying, here are the grievances, you didn't pay attention, so now it's time for the breakup. Dave, let's get back into it.
So let's go across the pond and talk about how this was received. I mean, you're writing a document here. This idea of consent of the governed is so, it seems like it would be so radical. It's really not in the English constitutional tradition. I mean, this was the whole point of the Glorious Revolution. This was the whole point of the First English Civil War. This idea that the king was just, being a tyrant was not acceptable. And so they did away with that stuff. And now here they are, Parliament basically doing the same thing again, King George III doing the same thing again to the colonies. When in other places like Paris and Madrid, it's not they're not going to allow their people to read it. In Britain, in fairness, it's published in the newspapers there. The people in London actually read the Declaration of Independence. They argue about it. They talk about it in their coffee houses and tea houses. And their reaction, by and large, is derision and anger. They are.
You think that was the intent in publishing it? That let's make them mad at the colonials here.
Yeah, that could very well be. Some of them obviously are in favor of this. Some of them are not. But because you have this stratified society in England, you have this reaction that it's an absurd concept that, quote, all men are created equal. There's a lot of pointing out of the hypocrisy of that. The idea that the colonies are demanding an unalienable right to liberty seems strange to English people because, America practices slavery. We don't have time to get into all this stuff, but remember that Jefferson had put in the original draft this accusation that King George had inflicted slavery on the United States, on the colonies. That was taken out in favor of the southern colonies and the likes of that. But there is a certain element of hypocrisy to that, an uncomfortable idea. Even today, we still get that. Well, how can we say all men are created equal if we don't necessarily treat them all as equal? And while there is validity to that concern in 1776 and even today, there's also the necessity to recognize it for what it is, which is hope, not necessarily established fact. The vagueness and elasticity of the Declaration's language allows it to transcend immediately the historical moment right at the time. There's ambiguity in this text that allows future generations then to read it, not just redefine it, but to expand it. The scope of natural rights being there and being put on paper makes it a fact. And it's, while in 1776, 1787, 1836, 1848, 1860, maybe that doesn't necessarily get, acceptable at that point. But the promise doesn't go away. It's still there. It's still the foundational document of what we have, who we are, and what we are trying to become. It's a goal, not an established moment. We're not saying right now, this is exactly who we are. We're saying this is who we want to become. Like most breakups, I want to grow. I want to be something more than I am today. This is a starting point for this whole thing. It's this Declaration of Independence, written by us in 1776, that becomes the blueprint literally for the future. And it becomes a global manifesto. It's recognized for its belief in human rights and resistance against oppression wherever it may be found. The structure and language are going to directly, you asked me earlier, what effect does this have? Mm-hmm. It directly inspires the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen in 1789, which leads to the French Revolution. Why does the French Revolution fail? Why do you start with a king and end with an emperor? Because while they accept the idea of the consent of the governed and they accept these ideas of egalitarianism and liberty, they don't, what we did, they don't do, which is they don't plan for a functional government. In fact, they come up with a government that's so bizarre that it had to be squashed. Later on, Elizabeth Cady Stanton will quote the Declaration of Independence in her Declaration of Sentiments, advocating for women's suffrage in 1848. When we say all men are created equal, do we mean just people with, Part A, or do we mean everybody? Do we mean all of mankind? Mm-hmm. And even then, that's uncomfortable because what's still going on? Slavery. Frederick Douglass will give his famous speech, "What is the 4th of July?" to a slave. And while you can read that speech in one sense, which is it's primarily aimed at the Constitution and the criticism of the Constitution as a pro-slavery document, he keeps coming back to that idea that all men are created equal. Do we really believe this or not? And he ends that speech on a note of hope. This document doesn't tie us into this. It doesn't lock us into this for eternity. It gives us the opportunity. It gives us the basis. It gives us the idea to change these things. And we did. Right down to 1945. In 1945, in Vietnam, which had been ruled by the Japanese, the French, and then the Japanese later, Ho Chi Minh declared the Declaration of Independence from colonial French rule in 1945, quoting our Declaration of Independence, calling upon the United States to be a part of Vietnam's independence on the basis of the very principles, the consent of the governed, and the natural rights that we had put forward. And the United States' response to that in 1945 was basically to ignore him. What if we hadn't? One wonders what the world would change.
Would have been a big difference there.
The reality of our document is this breakup document, this point at which we tell England, it's not us, it's you, is that we have established these ideas which are immutable and unarguable. And at the end of the day, all of the arguments against it fall down. And we have established a principle that is a goal to be reached for, that even today we are still reaching for. But the goal is still there. We haven't gone like the French and said, oh, we'll just change directions willy-nilly in every which way we go and start chopping people's heads off. We always come back to that. All men are created equal. All men have natural, unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we may not be perfect today, but in order to form a more perfect union, we have this foundational document that's going to allow us to move constantly forward in that direction.
And we continue with your thoughts on Dave Does History, 321-768-1240. We do that in 1 minute on WMMB. Well, speaking of links to Dave's stuff, Dave, if you'll recall, he and Rod had the What the Frock, the musical that David created. You're in the middle of doing something very similar. You've created music, Dave, for this entire Liberty 250 series.
Yeah, I wouldn't say the entire series, but much of it.
Not done yet.
Yeah, it's not done yet. And a couple of weeks ago when we were off, it was that April 12th, 21st, somewhere in there, I actually released a podcast that had about half of what I've done through that. The first album, the first half is available on Spotify. Spotify, iTunes, wherever you download music from. And yeah, it's been a fun experience. And I took the approach of trying to do it as kind of like Schoolhouse Rock. So I didn't want really deep philosophical thought. I wanted stuff that was upbeat, that, catchy, that you'd remember and stuff like that. And I've really enjoyed it. I've had a great time writing that and getting it.
So how they find it when they go to Dave Does History or the Dave Bowman Show?
There's several links to it. The music of Liberty 250 is on there. But if you have iTunes, Spotify, or even, Bill, iHeartRadio, it's all on there. You just look for David Ray Bowman, and We Hold These Truths is the name of it. And
We Hold These Truths. Go look for that. I mean, some very creative things and very well done. I've caught bits and pieces of them throughout the months that we've been doing this. And by the way, Liberty 250 continues through a July 4th edition of the Florida Roundtable that'll bring it all together. So that'll be fun. Dave Bowman, thank you, my friend. O'Galley Electric brought you this hour of the show. Tomorrow's a Wide Open Wednesday. Dave, we'll talk to you next Tuesday and travel back in time a week.
By your command.
The ties of consanguinity.
That's a fancy word for our family tree.
You pushed us away with every new tax, and now there's no way we're turning back.
We must acquiesce to the necessity of
Finding our own brand new destiny. We appeal to your justice, your big noble heart.
But you've been tearing our connection apart. In war, you're an enemy.
That's how it goes, but in peace we're still friends.
Not permanent foes.
We're taking our things,
We're changing the locks.
the keys to the colonies are in a tea box. We appeal to your justice, your big noble heart.
But you've been tearing our connection